What is up, everybody? Today we are gonna do how to drift a mid-engine car. Since I started drifting in like 2004, I've seen a couple mid-engine cars at the track, none of which have done any good, and it's usually just people that have those cars and want to go out and see drifting, which is cool. But it's always been a little thing that I've wanted to at least try to build one to be a fun car, be a cheap car to drive, and hopefully put new challenges in the driving aspect of it. So we'll give a little walk around of the car here, and then we're gonna shred some. All right, so obviously this is an AW11 MR2. For those of you who do not know what that is, it's like an 85 to 89 Toyota MR2. And we've done a few modifications to this. I'm giving you a quick walk around here so you can kind of get an idea of what's going on with the car and its usable space and whatnot. Got my shadow in there. The video guys will love that. So what we started off with was some extremely light wheels and tires, right? So we got these BBS Miata wheels that are about 7.5 or 8.5 pounds. They're insanely light, and that's going to be key to what we're doing, because this car doesn't have a lot of power, so any extra jam we can get out of it is going to be key. We got some smaller tires on here. They're 185 or 195 55s, and then we went ahead and put some BC coilovers on this and added some camber to the front to hopefully get some more grip in drift. I went with the standard spring rates on this because I didn't really know what I needed, so I went with BC's specs on that. Drives really good on the street, and hopefully it does well at the track. Then we went ahead and modified the steering angle by modifying the pickup point on the actual knuckle. So I'll try to get in here for you. As you can see, we've chopped and welded it and shortened it and corrected some of the Ackerman. And what that's done is given us a really pretty stand-up amount of angle that has good Ackerman. And it's about 50 degrees, 48 degrees, and stock was like 25, so this is going to massively help. To make some room, instead of extending the lower control arm, what we did was put a large 40 millimeter spacer in there to give us some clearance. We also put some brake pads on it, just because the ones that were on there were old, and we needed some more bite. This car already, excitingly enough, had a blacktop 20 valve 4AGE. So this is that motor that the guy puts in, Bunta puts in the 20 valve Corolla in Initial D, so that's kind of neat. And then of course we've got our huge honking K&N filter on there. I don't ever like to worry about my filter being dirty and causing robbing horsepower, so I put the biggest air filters I can on there, and then I never have to service them. But a little bit more about this motor is individual throttle bodies, about 8,400 RPM, and I think it's right at about 140-ish wheel horsepower. And then also in the engine compartment we put a new clutch, which we just did like a sprung stage 2 to keep it simple and not break the drivetrain. And we welded the diff. Inside we put a excessive handbrake in there. We had to get rid of the center console and all that. It was all chewed up anyway, to mount the handbrake, but we've got an upright inline handbrake in there, and it's just inline, so obviously it uses the factory rear caliper, which we've put nicer brake pads in, so we can lock the rear tires up really well. As far as the alignment on it, I went ahead and did 0 camber, and I actually did an 1/8 inch toe out in the back. And the reason I did that is because I know this thing's a little bit underpowered, and we're really trying to get as much as we can out of this car so that we can really shred it. So it's right at 0 camber and a 1/8 inch toe out. This makes it a pain in the ass to drive on the street, so kind of pay attention to that. It's another shot of our handbrake here and shifter assembly. It's kind of neat. And then we've got our BCs with camber plates up here. So that's the walk around about the car. Hopefully we've done a good job. I've done the best I can setting it up to work with what we have. And oh, one more thing. I left the rear as high of an offset as physically possible, so it will have as much side bite as it can possibly have. This car is prone for having like really quick transitions and having it hard to catch the car, so I added as much side bite as possible by keeping the offset in the rear as low as possible. I know it's not cool stance points, but it should be better to drive. So let's go shred this thing. All right, so throughout this instruction, I'm gonna kind of breeze through it and relate more to the guys who have already drifted a rear-wheel drive car. We have a ton of videos on how to drift every type of rear-wheel drive car, so be sure to check out those videos if you need to get filled in the gaps. But for this car, being that it's mid-engine, it's gonna be prone to understeer, and what that obviously is when you're steering the wheel and you're oversteering the front, and it's not gripping. So you're plowing, basically you're turning, giving more steering input than the car can take. So you cannot just turn and clutch kick and have this car go into donuts immediately. It just isn't gonna happen. Honestly, that doesn't really happen with rear-wheel drive car either. It's always easier to just either use the handbrake or some sort of abrupt movement to brake the car out. So in this car, going into the donuts, we're gonna come in 25 miles an hour, handbrake pull, get the car to rotate around this cone, and then we're gonna use a lot of throttle to keep the car lit off. This car, like I said, it's kind of low on horsepower. It does have a bit more horsepower than they come with stock, but we're gonna use a lot of RPM and a lot of wheel speed because that's what's gonna make this car the most happy in the donuts themselves. First gear, handbrake, and we're on the throttle. This motor is so snappy. She revs so good. So more throttle is going to bring us out a little wider. Less throttle will bring us in here, nice and close. And we're just steering left to add angle and right to reduce angle. So if we add too much, steer right. If we add too little, we steer left to keep it in drift. So now that we've done our donuts, and it seems pretty similar, this car does have modded steering angle by a little bit, so it helps. But what we're going to do now is an actual drift turn. And the gearing is a little bit off on this car, so we might actually have to be in first. But first is like 50-something miles an hour because of 9,000 RPM, so it's certainly not the slowest thing ever. Let's give it a shot and see how it does versus a regular car. Man, this thing has so much power, like in the top rev ranges. Yeah, the gearing's just a bit long to do second gear, which sounds stupid to you guys, but like, just to let you know, like I was entering that turn at like 45 or 50. In second gear, it was only at 4,000 RPM. So let's give it a shot in first and see how it does. Good that way, plenty of wheel speed and everything it was supposed to. The difference that I'm feeling is it's much similar to like my FD car. It actually has like low front grip and a ton of rear grip, and it doesn't want to snap around at all. Like everybody who talks about snap oversteer with these things obviously just lets off the gas and it snap oversteers because of that. The car has so much grip that when you stay in it, it wants to stop you from drifting. It's actually a really fun and easy car to drive. If it had a shorter gear ratio for this particular track, it would be really, really good. We'll try second again, now that I have a little bit of practice. Yeah, it does not want to do second gear, unfortunately. It's definitely going to be a first gear thing. Some of the bigger turns, we might be able to do second gear. Again, I know this sounds funny, but with the wheel speed of this thing and the gearing it has, it makes sense. Let's give it it one more shot here. That's awesome. Yeah, it works really, really good with the gearing right, and I'm pedaling it because it has plenty of power above like 4,800, 5,000, but I don't want to beat the shit out of the car clutch kicking it so much, so I'm just doing basically not able to get it onto the pipe in second gear. So with that turn, as you saw, getting on the power as late as possible, but keeping the momentum of the turn as fast as possible, meaning you're not dropping down speed and then trying to climb back up, you're just going as fast as you can, allows the car to stay in the power band and the car to stay on track. It's actually really interesting. So moving forward into transitioning turns, I believe that with this car, the big thing is going to be staying on the throttle, using as much throttle as you can, and then using the off-throttle lift to be able to allow the car to float into the next turn. Because when you're on throttle, it wants to straighten and make tons of grip. All right, so this car's actually been really cool. It has a ton of forward grip, even with these small 185 tires on it. At like 65 PSI, the car feels as fast as like some of the like real drift cars I've driven. It's obviously to scale with the amount of power and the tire and all that, but it's very reactive to the throttle, and as long as you have some sort of throttle input, the car doesn't want to come around. You can drive it pretty hard, you can huck it pretty good. We're running about 25 PSI in the front tires, and they're just 185, 50, 14s, like small tires. That way we can maximize the angle. But overall, like I said, the car feels, it's actually super fun to drive because it drives like an FD car, but it's like $5 a lap instead of $5,000 a lap. So it's quite funny for that aspect of it. We're going to work a little bit on the transitions here on the last two turns here at Pat's Acres with the School of Drift. So we're going to go ahead and work on these last two turns, see how it does through a transition and some big elevation changes. It's only about 5 to 6 feet of elevation change, but it happens like in 15 feet, so it's very quick. So you get to use a lot of the suspension, and we'll get to see how this thing reacts to maybe some of the worst quick undulations you'd drive in. All right, see how it does. Oh, dude, this thing rips. Transition, you just breathe a little bit, it wants to snap, you floor it, and it just stops the angle from being added. Really, really good. The power is awesome. Like I said, I wish I had a little bit shorter of a gear so I could be up a gear for this, but overall it's I'm really happy with how it drives. I'm really intrigued to see something like what it would be like to have a higher horsepower one of these. This car probably makes about 145, 150 of the tires. It's got like a header on it, and it's got intake, like a big, huge honking K&N filter on there. It's the factory 20 valve motor, so it revs super high. John Reed gave us one of his 8,500 RPM ECUs, so it screams up top. It's kind of scary revving a motor that's older than me. Or maybe not older than me, I guess. The car's older than me. But a motor that's 25 or almost 30 years old to 9,000, it's a little sketchy. Let's give it another shot here. So good. Sorry, I didn't talk during that one. I was really trying to feel it out. So it's cool. Like, it floats off throttle a little bit, but it has a lot of like sideways grip, which again is the opposite of what most of these people are talking about. It's snap oversteering. The car, when you lift, actually reduces angle and wants to drive out of drift, which is useful because then that means you can drive it harder. A lot lot of you guys out there that maybe drift already might know, like with your car, that a lot of times you're driving, you're trying not to spin. This is the opposite with this car. If you're on the gas, you're trying to add angle. It's cool. We'll give it another shot. I'm actually really enjoying driving this thing. Ridiculous. You can hear that induction coming through there. That K&M filter definitely doesn't have any restriction to those ITBs. Literally like just limiter. Boom! So good. So good. I actually want to see if I can drift that section backwards, because I feel like this car would be really good for that. The only complaint I have for this car is that A, it doesn't have power steering, and there's not an easy way to add it. And the seats, even though people talk these seats up a lot, they are not very good. They're certainly better than stock leather BMW seats though. I was just expecting a little bit more holding capacity. And I have the thing cranked all the way up. Let's see if we can do this section backwards. I love it. It's so good. We even slowed the car down on the brake, pivoted it, turned it around, and hit the section backwards. So good. I dropped a little bit of a tire, so I lifted so we didn't dust the whole track with dirt. Probably still dusted the track with dirt. So, anyways, so for transitions very much like a regular car. It does have more side grip, which again goes against what I was saying. I would have thought the car would have been loose on the side with the engine being in the back. But on paper, looking at everything, the weight distribution, I mean, it definitely drives absolutely amazing. All right, here we go. Let's try for another full lap here. It's so solid. Man, I just wish the gearing was a little shorter. I'm having to work the shifter a whole ton. Outside of that, it's been fantastic. All right, so like I was saying, the big differences here between this car and some of the other ones, now that we have the car not running, so you can hear me probably. The car off throttle and on throttle doesn't want to add angle really ever. And that's partly because of how much rear grip it has, how long the traction arm is in the rear suspension design. It basically is just massive amounts of rear grip. Which again, like I know I keep saying this, I don't know why anybody in the right mind ever says anything about this car having a lack of rear grip, ever. If anything, it's a lack of front grip because of how much rear grip it makes. The front end steering wise, it doesn't have power steering, which is kind of tough for me. It's not so bad in a stock one. Some of you guys might be like, oh, it doesn't need power steering. But when you add a bunch of angle, you're making each bit of the wheel turn the actual the front wheels more. So what happens is it's twice as hard to steer the car versus the regular steering. Think of it like a leverage thing. Like if you have a ruler hanging off of a table and you press it at the end, how easy it is. And then you go to the middle, it's a lot harder, probably twice as hard. So that's a little bit of a deal I'm fighting with. We'll see here in a minute. I'm going to do some more laps and see if I can smooth it out. The big thing is, again, just being heavy on the throttle throughout the turn, so that way you don't have to do as much steering input. Again, like I said, the gearing is a little off, which is kind of unfortunate. If the track was bigger, I think it would be fine. I think it would have no problem drifting second gear, which would be like up to like almost 75 or 80 miles per hour wheel speed. Actually, probably definitely 80 miles an hour of wheel speed. But I don't have that, and it's really difficult to find different ratios for the diff and do that because it's like front wheel drive style. Again, main differences for this car is the initiation is really one of the biggest things. You got to be able to get the car sideways and set before you pick the throttle up. Otherwise, it will either remove angle or induce some understeer because of that rear grip. And the other thing is in the transition, it wants to pick up a lot of speed really quickly, so you got to make sure you extend that first turn going into the next turn as much as you can to be able to make that turn and give yourself ample time to be able to line the car up and do what you need to do. I'm really happy with how this car turned out. It's been a lot of fun. I know moving forward I need to order a smaller tire, which again will be cheaper, and we can go out and have some fun. But I think this car, especially here at Park in the rain, would be just an absolute insane tandem car in the chase. It doesn't have a ton of angle, but it's got enough because of how much grip it has. Yeah, my advice to anybody who wants to build one, like I said, is maybe the supercharged motor with a little bit more power. I think this car with about 200 crank horsepower would be amazing to drive, and there's tons of motors you can put in this that make 200 horsepower at the crank stock. Like a Beams motor with a tune would be easily perfect for that. A K-Series swap, an F-Series swap, whatever, easy front wheel drive. I think even like the Corolla, the Toyota Corolla engine, those are all definitely good power plants for any of that. But yeah, super fun to drive. I haven't had a challenge like this in a while, and it wasn't necessarily a challenge in terms of difficulty to drive, just learning something new and being excited about something that you haven't done before, like drifting this car. So this car is actually going to be for sale, so if you want to buy it, the details will be in the link description below, and hopefully we can pass it on to someone else who will have some fun and learn how to drift with it. Did you whip that thing or what? You whip that thing?